I heard her, but it felt like my brain had disconnected from the rest of my body. I was stunned, unsettled, unable to move, think, much less say anything meaningful. "Damn it," I muttered. "What?" asked Leslie. At that moment, all I could think about was that I had just read the death warrant for my marriage. I had not yet recovered from the shock of the phone call, but somehow I was able to put it off for later. Now, the letter made it clear that the person who wrote it may no longer be my wife. "What's there? What does it say?" Leslie insisted. It was too much. I definitely read something wrong. I needed to reread the letter. I clearly missed something important. "Rick, hey, what's happened?" One of the traits required to become an Army officer is the ability to bounce back quickly from a traumatic event. On many missions overseas, I was surprised by how quickly I could take control of a chaotic situation after an attack or accident. The state of act now, complain later has saved my life and the lives of my comrades more than once. I might have been in shock after reading Marcy's letter, but it didn't take long before Colonel Weston took control of the situation. This came in handy because poor Rick was stunned, unable to think clearly. My brain switched into problem-solving mode, and my priorities were aligned in my head. Priority number 1 is to send Leslie home without offending her. After all, it wasn't her fault. It was just me and Marcy. "Rick, I would." "Leslie, listen," I interrupted her. "Thank you very much for coming here tonight. But as you probably already guessed, the contents of this letter blew up my life." I hesitated, but still decided to ask. "Have you read it, Leslie?" "No, seriously, Rick, I would never dare read it," she assured me, a little upset that I could even suggest such a thing. "Okay, well, thanks for the company, but I have a lot on my mind. Can I reschedule our plans for another evening?" It was clear from the expression on her face that she did not expect such a turn. I was glad to see only sadness and concern in her eyes, and not anger or resentment. "Okay, Rick, I understand. You won't do anything stupid, right?" she asked, taking the bottle of Moscato from me, which I handed to her. "Don't worry. And before you say no, I won't hesitate to knock on your door if I need anything," I answered with a smile. I must have sounded calm enough because she smiled back at me before walking away into the twilight, her sundress billowing, revealing her stunning curves. But at that moment my thoughts were occupied with something completely different. Priority number 2, keep your grief to yourself. I called the office and left a message on my secretary's answering machine that I was taking the rest of the week off. Family problem, communication only by email. She knew me well enough to understand that I had good reasons. And importantly, she knew not to ask questions. Priority number 3, numb the pain. I returned to the kitchen and downed the contents of my glass of Moscato, and then the rest of Leslie's glass. Then I saw the letter again, which I never put back in the envelope. In a fit of rage, I swept it off the table as something too dirty to even look at. Leslie and the logistics were over, and my peace of mind dissolved. I grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels from the cabinet and headed to my chair. To hell with the glass, and to hell with manners. I sank into a chair and raised the bottle. "For the bitch, come on, have sex with your doctor, you stupid woman of easy virtue." I took 2 sips of the amber liquid I loved so much. But at that moment she seemed bitter. God, I was so angry. Playing soldier. Yeah, devil. I probably spent a couple of hours berating my wife while downing Jack Daniels. Then I think I passed out, and my blood alcohol levels may have reached quite alarming levels. I must have passed out hard because the sun was already high when I finally woke up. Damn. 12:20. When was the last time I slept for so long? Probably in adolescence. Jack's bottle lay empty on the floor. Conscience is clear. It was less than half full when I took it out of the closet the night before. Getting out of the chair was quite a feat. Firstly, because no one should sleep for 14 hours in a chair while drunk, and secondly, because at 48 years old my back is no longer what it used to be. One thing that was soothing or frightening was that my head and stomach were in complete agreement with my back. Jack was my best friend last night, but today a new best friend is medicine. I went out onto the deck to have coffee and suddenly felt extremely grateful that the fence between my yard and my neighbors, the Nielsen's, was hidden behind a hedge thick enough that no one could get through it. I wasn't in the mood to chat with my neighbors, much less the Nielsen's. They knew too much not to ask questions I didn't want to answer. The thought of locking the gate crossed my mind, but I didn't want to send the wrong signal. I wasn't mad at them, I was mad at my wife who was walking around. And on that score, no, things weren't getting any better. As soon as my stomach signaled that it was ready to eat again, I made myself breakfast and went back outside to eat it. The only thing I could think about was how I could sneak into Bogota, sneak up on this bitch and her doctor perfect in their room and kill them, and then move on to the next scenario. He's playing soldier. Do you want to know how a soldier plays, bitch? Maybe saving your own skin and the lives of those around you is also a game. Would you call this a game? What little self-control I had left was barely enough to stop myself from screaming. I couldn't believe she dared compare what happened in 15 minutes between me and Deirdre to her carefully planned 6-week affair in South America. Birdhouse next to the mansion. A squirrel next to a tiger. Did she really think I would swallow it? If yes, then she, in addition to being a woman of easy virtue, is also an idiot. If someone accidentally pushes you on the street, do you shoot them 3 times in the chest? If this was Marcy's idea of how to even the score, she's in for a big surprise. Late in the afternoon, our son Kyle called me. Hello, Dad, how are you? Hello, son. Yes, not bad. I'm taking advantage of the fact that your mother is away to sort out the papers that have accumulated at work. How are you? Oh, everything is as usual at school. How's Mom? Any news? She didn't even write to me that everything was fine with her. Marcy always tried to call her children at least twice a week. Kyle was fine with it, but I knew Rhonda thought it was a little over the top. Although Rhonda was generally difficult to get in touch with, so in her case, try was the key word. Don't worry, son, she's fine. She texted me that she had checked into the hotel. She also said that you should not sit on the phone waiting for news. This is a humanitarian mission, and they will not always be in cities where there is a good signal. Some of the places they plan to visit are quite remote. Damn, I hate lying to my kids. But I didn't want to give updates that I probably wouldn't get, and I certainly didn't want to tell him or Rhonda about the detailed circumstances of my mother's expedition. Most of all, no matter how angry I was at my so-called wife, I could not afford to badmouth her in front of the children. She was their mother. My complaints against her had nothing to do with her relationship with our children. Okay, Dad, keep me posted if you find out anything. I'll write to her from time to time. Take care of yourself, son, and don't forget to watch the game on Saturday, I added jokingly, as if Kyle would miss a football game. No way, Dad, love you, he laughed and hung up. I put the phone down, sighing in relief. Apparently, he won't call for at least a couple more weeks. This will give me time to develop an action plan and communication strategy. This was the least of Rhonda's worries. She was on assignment on a warship in the Southern Ocean, and communication with her was extremely rare. Since talking on the phone is clearly not her passion, I didn't expect a call from her for at least 3 more weeks. My thoughts turned to the fact that Jack's bottle was empty. I definitely wasn't going to drink water or milk all evening. While rummaging through my closet for something that might help me numb the pain this evening, I came across a bottle of Amarone della Valpolicella 2003 that my wife had put aside for some special occasion that I had no idea about. I decided that this special occasion is today, a holiday in honor of yourself and the end of 24 years of marriage with a lying traitor. I poured myself a glass. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Marcy's favorite framed photo of the 2 of us on the mantelpiece. I took a couple of steps towards the fireplace and took it in my hands. Damn you, bitch! I took a sip of wine and launched the frame into the stone wall above the fireplace. Then he returned to his chair for another round of curses. He's playing soldier. Too many kicks in the ass missed their mark, I thought. I've made sacrifices my entire career, and this is where it led me. I'll call Deirdre tomorrow. My only mistake in Iraq was that I didn't go all the way with it. After our all too brief sexual encounter, I took the attacks as a sign that I shouldn't go any further. Stupid idiot. I should have taken this as a reminder that life is short and it rarely gives second chances at good things. I raised my glass. Marcy, did you want revenge? Well, I'll give you a real reason to be mad at me, to your health. I remember finishing the bottle and going to bed. A clear improvement from the previous night. Thursday went a little better, or more accurately, a little less bad. The headache didn't hurt so much anymore, but I was still furious. I didn't even bother to pick up the glass shards from the broken frame and stuck my heel on one of them. I spent most of the day in a chair, lining up empty beer cans where my wife's photograph once stood. In the evening, I heard Leslie's distinctive knock on the back door. Wonderful. How can you make an already bad day even worse? It's enough for someone to come and start asking you questions. I barely made it to the door, limping. Leslie's face, always so joyful, instantly darkened when she saw the state I was in. Oh my God, Rick, you look terrible, maybe. No, I don't need anything. Go home, Leslie, and leave me alone, for God's sake. I almost shouted, slamming the door. I waited for her to leave before returning to my chair. The next beer cans were much better companions. They didn't ask questions, and they certainly didn't think of setting me up with a neighbor's wife to ease their conscience. That night, I finally came up with a plan. Tomorrow, I would go to the hospital where Marcy works and talk to the hospital president to show him the letter she wrote. I remembered that Marcy's employment contract made it clear that the hospital had a strict policy against intimate relationships between employees, so let them abide by it. I believe the president will be sued if they don't fire Marcy and her doctor. Of course, I won't get anything from this, but it will be sweet revenge. But before that, I'll call Deirdre. My wife is not the only woman on earth, after all. I didn't depend on her. There will definitely be other women who find me attractive. I, too, am capable of making a woman desire me. I can spend a wet, muddy weekend with one of these two, and I'll choose one. Go to hell, Marcy. Here's to your health. I woke up the next day to the distinctive ringtone of my work phone. It took a few seconds to realize what was happening. A quick glance at the clock on the nightstand confused me. 5 a.m. Who gets a call at 5 a.m. for heaven's sake? Rick Weston. Bonjour, Rick. This is Laurent Dutchmain, Ministry of Security, Paris. Okay, I'm quite fluent in French, but so early in the morning and with alcohol still pumping through my veins, I wasn't ready for this. I knew Laurent a little. French and American intelligence services often collaborated on a number of projects. He was a pleasant person, but did not like talking about anything. Everything is essentially, Bonjour, Laurent, what do you owe this early call? Early? Well, I waited until 8 a.m. to call. I live on the West Coast. It's 5 a.m. here now. Oh, sorry, Rick, my mistake. I thought you were in Washington, he replied. His Parisian accent was so thick that I momentarily wondered if I should ask him to speak French to make it easier. It's okay, Laurent, I'm not sleeping anymore. What's the matter? A complex situation arose that would require the participation of the intelligence services of several countries, and my company was the main consulting partner in this matter. And this was a big problem. An infrequent but important event that no one wants to see on the front pages of the news. 3 minutes later, I was fully awake, and my inner Colonel Weston was fully engaged. We talked for almost an hour. When I hung up the phone, I already had a clear understanding of how the rest of the day and the next week would go. I was still mad at Marcy, and I was still planning on calling Deirdre and visiting Mr. Ball Fish, a nickname that I swear no one else at the hospital uses when talking about the president, but all of that would have to wait. Now I had much more urgent matters to attend to. After the most thorough shower I've had in a week and the most nutritious breakfast I've had in the same period, I was ready to do something more useful than scream at the walls, although it may not have been as satisfying. I spent most of the day reading preliminary reports, calling colleagues in London, then Washington and Ottawa, and delving into the strategy that was being developed for the next week. I dialed Deirdre's number, but it went to her answering machine. I didn't want to leave a message that would raise questions. It's already 16:30. It's clearly too late to go to the hospital, which is 40 minutes away. Apparently, this will have to be postponed until next week. I sent the secretary an email confirming that I would be in the office the following Monday, then finished checking my cases and called it a day. I decided that I was tired of sitting within four walls and went to the nearest restaurant. It's better to dine in my own company than in the company of photographs of my unfaithful wife. Fish chips, of course, are not the healthiest, but at least I didn't touch alcohol. That night, I went to bed early. The mental stress and alcohol of the entire week took a toll on my body. I woke up surprisingly refreshed on a beautiful Saturday morning. The phone rang just as my coffee was brewing. "Hello, this is Rick. Since when do you call an old friend and not leave a message, Ricky boy?" said a cheerful and teasing voice. Deirdre Keel. "Hey, how many years, how many winters?" I briefly told her about my terrible week, and she was shocked. "Oh my God, Ricky, I don't know much about Marcy, but she's nothing like the girl you described when we were in Iraq," she replied. "No, it doesn't look like it at all. Perhaps the changes were too subtle for me to notice them in time," I sighed. "Hey, why don't you come over to my place tonight? Shall I make something better than the canned spaghetti you've probably been eating all week?" I learned that Deirdre had moved from Boston to a neighboring city a month ago and bought a new house. She explained to me how to get there since her area was brand new and wasn't on the navigation apps yet. It was a 90-minute trip, so she suggested that I take everything I needed to stay the night, which was more or less my plan that I had been thinking about all week. But first of all, I needed to apologize to Leslie for being rude to her when she came over 2 days ago. I walked across our backyards around noon. I didn't even have to knock. Leslie saw me and opened the door with a discreet smile. "How are you, Rick?" she asked in an unusually neutral tone. "Much better, thank you. Leslie, listen, I want to apologize for the way I treated you Thursday night. Apparently too much beer on bad days is not good for me. I'm really sorry." Her face immediately brightened. "Apology accepted, Rick, and I'm glad to see you in a better mood. Hey, Colonel, do you have time for a drink? Come in," Vincent shouted as he walked down the stairs. "No, thanks, guys. I appreciate the invitation, but I have other plans for today. If you want to have dinner, our doors are always open, and I'm sure Leslie will do everything to make sure you have a great evening," he winked. Leslie blushed. "Guys, I'll tell you honestly, I understand perfectly well where you are going and where you want to take me. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested. But now is clearly not the time for such things. I really don't think having sex with my neighbor to spite my wife is a smart way to deal with the mess I'm in. And despite what Marcy said before she left, I don't think this will be good for our future relationship." "I understand," Leslie said with obvious disappointment. "But perhaps I'll take you up on your offer to just talk about this lifestyle over dinner. Like I said, I'm really interested in this." "We would be honored, Colonel." Vincent smiled widely. I returned home to finish getting ready for the night. I debated whether to take Marcy's letter with me. The letter was still lying on the floor in the kitchen. I still didn't dare to reread it. In the end, I decided to put it in my bag. If I was going to have fun with Deirdre, the letter might come in handy as an excuse. A few minutes later, I was on my way. To say that I felt like a teenager going on their first date would not be enough to describe my state. One of the first words that came to mind when describing Deirdre Keel was absence. She wasn't there. She was always traveling or on missions. She was always the first to respond to offers to be sent abroad. She seemed to dislike being at home, no matter where that home was. So I was amazed when I saw the two-story house she bought on a huge lot in a new, prestigious area. When she saw me getting out of the car, she almost ran out to me. "It's so great to see you, Ricky." She kissed me on the lips, which was very warm, and I responded with a big hug. And then it happened. Right there in the driveway, hugging my friend, whom I had arrived at with thoughts of a wild night. The floodgates in my head opened, and a flood of emotions washed over me. I burst into tears like a child. "Come in," Deirdre said quietly. "Let's talk about it." We sat on her terrace, and she brought us homemade sangria. This gave me time to calm down a little. "Well, Ricky, I have all your attention. Tell me everything from the very beginning." And I told her everything about the last few years, about what happened when I returned from Iraq, about my second career as a consultant, about how Marcy had risen to become head nurse on the neurosurgical team at the hospital. And then I told Deirdre about the last few months before Marcy left for Colombia, including her affair with Dr. Trash, or rather Trey. I was grateful for the box of tissues she placed in front of me. Deirdre listened without interrupting, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. And Leslie gave me the letter that Marcy asked me to give her. Here it is. Deirdre tried her best not to show any emotion as she read the letter, only commenting once, "Oh yes, we were definitely playing soldiers." She put the letter back in the envelope and looked at me silently for a moment. "Before you ask, Rick, I swear on my mother's life that when I visited her, I never told Marcy that I took care of you in any ambiguous way, like we had sex. Yes, I remember what happened then, and frankly, it doesn't make me proud, and I certainly wouldn't brag about it. Tell me, Deirdre, why did you come to her that day?" "I just wanted to calm her down. I knew that she was going crazy with worries and that she would not tell you this because you said that she was not particularly talkative. And honestly, Rick, you've always been a master at military tactics and strategies, but when it came to expressing feelings and understanding the emotions of others, you were like a cactus. I knew you didn't do much to calm her down." "Okay, thanks for the compliment. Actually, I'm wrong. No, the point is not that you don't understand other people's feelings. You just don't even try to understand them. For you, these are variables that can be discarded if they get in the way. But life doesn't work that way, buddy. Life is full of its constants, and Deirdre is one of them. She was always herself, no matter the circumstances. If you want to hear the hard truth straight in your face, turn to Deirdre Keel. She will never let you down." The sun was already setting. Deirdre stood up and headed towards the kitchen. I followed her with empty glasses and a jug. I didn't want to admit it, but Deirdre was right. Looks like I still have a lot to think about. Deirdre prepared everything in advance. All that remained was to fry 2 beautiful tuna steaks that had been marinating all day. I took over the grilling part. "All in all, I think it's a late bloomer," Deirdre concluded, setting everything out on the table on the terrace for al fresco dining. "Late bloomer? What do you mean?" "Marcy was essentially a single mother for many years while you were in Korea or Iraq. Yes, she had a job as a nurse, but it was just a job because her family responsibilities were too much. She could only truly open up when you quit and finally returned home. I understand that, but why then betrayal? What is this? Revenge?" Deirdre thought about it. "Yes and no, I would say." "Okay, can you explain?" "Yes. Perhaps this is revenge because she thinks that you and I slept together in Iraq. Because obviously you never explained to her what really happened, right?" She didn't want to listen. Classic male answer. "Have you tried again and again?" I had to be honest, at least with myself. "Not really." That's it. No one has proven anything to her, so she still believes that you and I had sex around the clock in Iraq. Honestly, I don't think what happened was much of a threat to your marriage. And I'm not even talking about those circumstances. "Okay, what about no?" I asked, slightly confused. "No, because I think it's not just about revenge. You see, the real, interesting part of her career started late in life. And now she is finally living it and enjoying it. This must be exciting for her. And now you say that she is participating in a specialized mission abroad. For the first time in her life, she feels like she has some kind of power. Look, for many people, achieving a high position or success is often accompanied by a feeling of entitlement, as if they feel like they finally deserve to take whatever they want because they are at the top. Listen to the news. Hardly a week goes by without some politician or company executive being caught in a scandal simply because they believed that their position gave them the right to do what they did. To a lesser extent, I think this happened with Marcy. It seems to her that now that she is at the top, the whole world is opening up before her, and all the doors have suddenly swung open. She feels invincible and doesn't even think that you can seriously leave her. I was stunned. I admit I didn't notice it. Well, Deirdre, you've given me something to think about. Thank you. I don't mind feeding your thoughts, but what if we fed our bellies too? Better take a look at those tuna steaks before they turn to stones, buddy. The dinner was amazing, and the wine I bought went perfectly with the fish. The rest of the evening was fun and more casual. It was Deirdre's turn to talk about her life. By the way, quite a big house for someone who is constantly trying to stay away from home. I mimicked her. Oh, well, I'm not getting any younger either. It's probably time to try to settle down. I can't wrap my head around the words Deirdre and settle in the same sentence, I joked. Oh, you would be surprised, she replied with a grin. Okay, what's his name? I asked with a wide smile. Well, you could say there are several of them. There were always several. But if I want to have a chance at a real relationship one day, I guess I need something like a home base, she said with an unusual nostalgia in her voice. The last few years haven't been kind to you, have they? No, I lived for work. Now I want to work and live. I know it sounds cliché, but that's exactly how I feel right now. She told me the details of her last assignment in Afghanistan. She wasn't in a combat zone, but the work was grueling because she was surrounded by real idiots who couldn't tell the difference between a tank and a fire truck. It was a pleasure to listen to her, and her laughter was contagious. When it was time to go to bed, I went to the guest room, which suited me just fine. I knew Deirdre had a soft spot for me, but I thought she knew it wouldn't be the best idea to do anything sexual that night, and I didn't even think about going to bed with her for fun. The fantasy I had been harboring for the past few days simply disappeared. The next morning, I woke up before Deirdre. I checked my messages. Kyle wrote that he was glad that his team won the championship, but there was nothing from Marcy. The coffee was almost ready when Deirdre came into the kitchen, all smiles. I suggested making real French pancakes. Knowing my legendary culinary talents, Deirdre looked at me in disbelief. However, to the surprise of both of us, I was able to make a smooth batter and the pancakes turned out perfect despite her doubts. We ate breakfast like an old couple, reading the newspapers in silence. Finally, I interrupted her. Do you think Marcy and I are done yet, Deirdre? She slowly folded the newspaper and put it on the table. She took a sip of coffee. I could be wrong, Rick, and I hope I am, but I don't see a future for you too. I was struck by the coldness of her answer. But on the other hand, Deirdre was sitting in front of me. No nonsense, no sugarcoating, ever. Okay, I appreciate your honesty. You see, Rick, the disrespect she shows for your marriage and her disdain for what we did as soldiers suggests that she no longer has any feelings for you. Plus, she didn't say goodbye before leaving and didn't write that she had arrived. So yes, I'm afraid in her mind you and her are already a thing of the past. I gave Deirdre a big, warm hug goodbye. I thanked her for everything and promised to keep in touch. The drive home consisted of thoughts like, what if only and maybe I should have. But I couldn't go back, and even if I could, what would I do? I returned home by mid-afternoon. Driving past the Nilssons' house, I noticed that they were not at home. Taking advantage of their absence, I got to work in the yard without the risk of being bombarded with questions. I didn't know if I was excited about going back to the office the next day. I couldn't sleep that night. I just couldn't accept that my marriage was over. There was a way out somewhere. I missed something. I still had 5 weeks to find out. I spent most of Monday planning the week, and although I was not in the mood, it became clear that I could not avoid a trip to Ottawa at the end of the week. Miss Matthews may have been curious and concerned about my absence last week, but did not mention anything and respected my right to privacy. However, since I likely had some serious turbulence ahead in my personal life, I decided it would be prudent to update my assistant on the events of the past week. I invited her to lunch and gave her a brief version of events. She was clearly shocked and assured me of her support. But as always, she did not offer her opinion on what was happening. And I knew that if I asked him, she would feel uncomfortable, so I didn't. However, I realized that talking about it helped me sort my thoughts a little. On the flight to Ottawa, I was lost in thought. What could I do to save my marriage? Was it the right approach to do what Marcy asked of me? If I do as she wants, will she take it as proof of my fidelity? Or if she truly no longer respects me, will my thoughtless adherence to her instructions earn her contempt and give her another reason to disrespect me? What about Leslie? Wouldn't it be pointless to have sex with her just to please Marcy? Yes, Leslie seemed pleasant and attractive to me, but the fact is that I never had a desire to enter into a relationship with someone who is almost half my age. I'm glad I didn't sleep with Deirdre. It would be revenge sex. And given the friendship and affection I've always felt for Deirdre, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror knowing that I'd used her body to vent my anger at Marcy. And I didn't want to do that to Leslie. I didn't judge my neighbors for their views on marriage and life, but I wasn't going to take advantage of them in difficult times. These thoughts did not leave me all evening while I was alone in the hotel room. Another unresolved issue related to Josh. Should I call him and tell him what I heard on the phone? I was confused. I considered Josh a friend. Not a close friend, but a guy who could form a friendship. I knew exactly that I would expect my friend to tell me everything he knew and not leave me in the so-called blissful ignorance. How would Josh react? To be honest, I had absolutely no idea what to expect if I showed up in the lobby of the Ambassador Hotel in a month, as Marcy had asked. Will I see a wife who longs to reconnect with her husband, or the estranged spouse who coldly announces that she is now happy with someone else and is ready to file for divorce? Or maybe she won't show up at all. At the beginning of the week, I was busy preparing for the trip and simply could not find time to visit the hospital to discuss the situation with the president. Was there even any point in contacting him, given that Marcy and I would soon be getting divorced? Marcy would be angry if I did that. But would that stop the real romance between her and her lover? And most importantly, do I want to stay married to a woman who feels forced to be with me? I had to go to Washington for a couple of days for a general meeting with federal agents and our Canadian colleagues with whom I worked last week. I returned home at the beginning of the third week of Marcy's trip. To my disappointment, I still had more questions than answers and couldn't figure out what to do with the rest of my life. As I sat in my chair Friday night, I was still trying to figure out why Marcy was so angry at me over what she thought happened between me and Deirdre in Iraq, even though she was having an affair while I was in Korea. Clearly, she did not consider this equal payment, and her revenge was not complete. I needed to know more about this. When Lydia emailed me to let me know Marcy's whereabouts, I simply thanked her for the information, but never asked for details. She said she saw Marcy in the Red Roof in parking lot, and I got an explanation for that from the private investigator I hired. But I never checked with Lydia about why Marcy showed up to the parking lot an hour before her shift started. I didn't want to start an email conversation with Lydia that could drag on for days. I needed answers immediately. I didn't have her number, but I knew where she lived. I decided to visit her the next day. The house was in a middle-class neighborhood built in the 80s. I parked in front of a house surrounded by a high concrete block fence. Lydia grew up here and bought the house from her parents after her first marriage broke down, so I was sure that she still lived there. I called twice. Finally, a man my age opened the door. "Yes?" he asked. I was almost embarrassed by the intensity of his gaze. "Good morning, sir. I'm an old friend of Lydia's. I was nearby and decided to stop by and say hello. Haven't seen her for several years." He looked at me silently for several seconds, and despair was visible in his gaze. "Nobody told you, as I understand it. My wife died in a car accident about 6 months ago." I was stunned. We made eye contact for a few seconds. I extended my hand. "Oh, I didn't expect this. Sir, I'm very sorry. My deepest condolences." "Thank you very much," he replied. I didn't know what else to say. I smiled quietly and left. After driving a couple of 100 meters to get out of sight, I stopped to collect my thoughts. Even though I hadn't seen Lydia in over 5 years, she was someone I had once been close to, and the news of her death shocked me. I drove home still lost in my thoughts. That's it. I won't know any more about what my wife did then. Rick Weston. Hey, Rick, this is Josh Washington. Good morning, Josh. How are you doing with forced abstinence? You know, Rick, I just wanted to talk to you about this. How about a beer at O'Grady's? I'll be there in half an hour. I arrived before Josh, sat down, and ordered a pint. The place was almost empty on this Sunday afternoon. Josh arrived a few minutes later. There was something mysterious on his face. I guessed what he wanted to talk about. He sat down and ordered. Once we were done with pleasantries, he laid it all out straight. Rick, Penny called me on Skype yesterday and cried. I've never seen her face so swollen. It probably took her 2 minutes before she was finally able to speak. She told me that the day after she arrived in Bogota, she slept with one of the doctors on the team, Dr. Evans. Oh, okay. What was your reaction? I answered, waiting for his opinion on this matter. I was able to stay calm. I asked her if it was a one-time fling or a real crush. She said it only happened once, and that the next day she regretted it so much that she didn't even think about doing it again. She said she cried for 2 weeks and just couldn't live with it anymore. I thanked her for her honesty and told her to enjoy the rest of the trip, that we'd talk about it calmly when she got back, and that I wasn't mad. I was surprised that I was able to take it so calmly. Okay, I replied. So what are you going to do? Remain calm on the phone while she's there, and then meet her at the airport with a divorce petition? No, no, no. I won't do that. See, I have to admit that I too have had my share of affairs over the years. Well, maybe 2 or 3. Therefore, if I lash out at her, it will be hypocritical of me. This is one of the reasons why I invited you for a beer. Any advice? You mean, should you tell her about yourself so she knows you just made the score more even? Yes, something like that. There is a risk that she will be angry with me for not telling her before she admitted hers. I think it's possible, Josh, but you know Penny better than I do. Josh's face became serious. Yes, but there's more to it, Rick. Penny said she's not the only one out there enjoying the horizontal exercises. It looks like Marcy is doing the same thing. I took a few seconds to answer. I know, Josh, but in Marcy's case, it's a full-blown romance with Dr. Trey. She wrote to me about this in a letter before leaving. This is a kind of revenge for the betrayal that she suspects me of when I was in Iraq. Did you cheat? Josh asked. No, there was no romance. It was a 15-minute kissing scene with a girl while we were both in shock after a bomb exploded just a few meters away from us an hour before. You're a firefighter, you know what that feeling is. Exactly, Josh answered. So I don't know what to do. Everything suggests that the only logical step is divorce. I'm slowly but surely coming to this conclusion, but the thought of it being a divorce over a misunderstanding is killing me, I said, trying hard not to cry. Penny told me about Trey a few weeks ago. All the nurses or female doctors in the hospital go crazy about him. Marcy probably thinks she's lucky. Yes, I guess so, I answered, a little annoyed. Since no one was waiting for us at home, we continued the beer with a light dinner. The change of topic benefited both of us. Monday set the tone for the rest of the week. The various government agencies we worked with kept pushing me all day to find a solution to the current problem, and I spent my evenings moaning and increasingly in tears over what my life had suddenly become. It was clear that the next step had to be mine. One evening, when I was more in the mood to find a solution than to complain, I carefully considered my options. Option 1. Do as Marcy asked, that is, meet her at the ambassador, wait for her to tell you how things are going for her, and see if there is a way to fix something. This option made me very uncomfortable because it gave her complete control over the situation. Perhaps she could meet me there with her lover to tell me that they were now together and my time was up. I felt that I had already been humiliated enough. Option 2. Pay off all joint credit cards, cancel them, Open a new bank account in your name only and transfer 50% of the balance on our joint accounts there. Rent an apartment and move all your things there. File for divorce and give her the documents right in the ambassador lobby. Then wait for her at home for the discussion or confrontation that will inevitably follow. Let my lawyer handle the rest. This was a fairly straightforward approach, and I felt that this is what most people would advise doing. Simple and effective. But even the very thought of it brought tears to my eyes. Yes, it would be a painful option, but perhaps the pain would not last long. Option 3. Since Marcy didn't want to talk on the phone because she would still end up in the room with her lover, send her a message or email explaining that I won't be coming to the ambassador because I filed for divorce, and she will receive a notification there. This was not the best option. First, there was no guarantee that Marcy would even check messages or mail. Secondly, even if she received the letter, she would most likely try to contact me to discuss it, and I didn't want to start a fight across 2 continents over our marriage. Option 4. Disappear without a trace. This would have the same result as a divorce, since within a year Marcy would likely file for divorce because of my leaving. I didn't like this option because it meant I would live in fear and hide. Not the lifestyle I want. Option 5. The day before she returns, send copies of Marcy's letter to our children, her parents, my parents, and our friends, and then call them to explain the situation. Then go away for 2 weeks to some all-inclusive in the Caribbean and let her figure it out on her own. It was a version of revenge, a version of scorched earth. At first glance, it was very tempting, but it wouldn't be my style to do that. Our family and friends were not supposed to know about the problems in our marriage. Honestly, I didn't want to expose myself as a cuckold to the whole world. The problem with such revenge was that after a few minutes of relief, the crisis would remain unresolved, and it would become even more difficult to get out of it. Prolonged torture. No, I don't want. To be honest, all of these options were disgusting. Unfortunately, option 6, in which last month simply would never have existed, did not exist. In short, I estimate that all 5 options have a greater than 90% chance of leading to divorce. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that filing for divorce was logical, and perhaps inevitably. I knew several lawyers. True, none of them dealt with divorce proceedings and family issues, but I could ask for recommendations. I decided to call the next day. On Monday, I was able to make an appointment with attorney Doug Atwater. This guy had a reputation for getting things done quickly, which is exactly what I wanted. He seemed very aggressive and rude to me. A contradiction in character immediately arose between us as soon as I sat down opposite him. I told him the short version of the situation and gave him a copy of the letter to Marcy. "How long has she been gone?" he asked after reading the letter. "Soon it will be 4 weeks," I answered. "Damn it. So it took you 3 weeks to realize that divorce was the only option?" he asked, with an expression of mixture of surprise and contempt. "To consider all options, yes," I answered calmly. "Okay, make me laugh. What other evidence do you need to understand that she doesn't care about you and that she left you a long time ago?" It felt like a tactic to shift my thoughts from sadness to struggle. I told him that my goals are not material. I didn't care about the house or bank accounts. I just wanted to end this agony as soon as possible and not prolong the matter. I asked him to prepare a statement that my wife was unlikely to argue with, so that everything would go quickly. Apparently, I was asking him to step outside of his normal combat zone, and he wasn't very happy about it. But he agreed to do as I asked. Mr. Atwater said the documents would be ready by next Friday. He will send a copy to my office and arrange for Marcy to have the papers delivered to her in the ambassador lobby 2 hours after her flight arrives. The following week was one of the busiest times of my career. I arrived at the office at 6 in the morning and did not return home until 10 at night. I spent most of my days on the phone with Europe and the East Coast and my evenings doing paperwork. Kyle texted me once or twice. When he said he was studying for his final exams, it struck me that the semester was already drawing to a close. He planned to return home after the exams in 4 weeks, which would be 2 weeks after Marcy returned. It is unlikely that the dust will have time to settle down during this time. It's strange that he still hasn't heard from his mother. But he said that after I explained the signal situation to him on site, he did not expect her to get in touch before returning. Rhonda also called me. She just wanted to know how I was doing. She had no contact with Marcy either, which was not a surprise since Marcy had said she would be unavailable for most of the trip. Due to the amount of work I did, I came home exhausted every evening that week. The guy from the takeout restaurant 3 blocks away quickly became my best friend. Of course, I didn't have the time to look for an apartment or the energy to start packing. It would have to wait. I also did not find time to meet with the president of the hospital. But what's the point now if Marcy and I are going to get divorced? I worked all day on Saturday and spent Sunday doing housework and gardening. I was watering the beds when I heard Vincent calling Leslie, who was in the house. I opened the gate and came over to say hello. Vincent greeted me with a big smile and asked how I was doing. I feel better. More peaceful than 4 weeks ago, let's put it that way, I replied. Oh, glad to hear that. Any news from Marcy? How is she doing? He asked. Not really. They travel to places where there is no signal, so she cannot communicate. Hey, Vincent, can I take advantage of your invitation to dinner? Certainly. I thought you'd never ask. How about this Friday? I can finally grill those steaks, he said cheerfully. Great, agreed. See you on Friday. The next week went much the same as the previous one, with a workload that gave me no respite. I had just sat down at my desk on Friday morning when a courier delivered my copies of the divorce papers to the office. I treated the envelope the same way I treated Marcy's letter, as if it were biological material with a risk of infection. I didn't want to open it. It could wait. However, just before lunch, all my carefully laid plans went awry. Laurent Dutchmain called me to inform me about a situation that we have been trying to resolve over the past few weeks. Things weren't going well. I called my colleagues, and it quickly became clear that I would have to go to Europe next week and stay there for at least 10 days. This meant that I wouldn't be able to be home the day Marcy was due back, the following Friday. This means option 1 is out of the question. Since I never seriously considered options 3, 4, and 5, the only choice left was option 2. Except that I won't be able to be home to discuss with her after she's served the papers. She will have to find the answers herself while awaiting my return. Just like I had to wait for her during these 5 weeks. On the way home, I bought a couple of nice bottles of wine. He quickly took a shower and went to the Nielsen's. Leslie greeted me warmly, and I was glad that there were no sexual innuendos in her behavior. Vincent couldn't stop praising the new butcher shop that had just opened nearby, where he found the steaks we were about to eat. It was a great dinner. The food was delicious, and the company of Leslie and Vincent was very enjoyable. We exchanged updates, and I told them more details about Marcy's letter. I didn't want to say that I filed for divorce. Perhaps it was part of revenge. After all, it was Marcy who created this chaos, so it was logical that she would be the one to tell everyone about our breakup and explain the reasons. After dinner, I helped clear the table, and we sat on the terrace with glasses of port. Since we were already a little under the weather after 2 bottles of wine, I thought there would be no harm in asking the question that was on everyone's mind. So, guys, I'm curious. Tell us how it started. I mean, how did you start sharing Leslie with other men? They were both a little taken aback, but Vincent quickly pulled himself together. Well, it all started as an ordinary fantasy. One evening, many years ago, we were watching a TV show. It was a documentary series about unusual sexual practices in North America. We were both fans of the show and used to comment on everything we saw. That evening, the program was about partner exchange, and I noticed that Leslie was especially passionate about this topic, even more than usual. After the show, I mimicked Leslie about how mesmerized she was, and she admitted that this kind of sex has been her fantasy for as long as she can remember. This intrigued me too. We talked about it for almost a year before we decided to. Literally jump into it. Vincent winked. Okay, but how do you, fully exchange partners, or is it always only Leslie who enjoys the attention of other men? Do you yourself have sex with other women? This happens sometimes, but this is not my main fantasy. At first, we dated other couples, but I quickly realized that I was essentially a voyeur, and my main pleasure came from watching Leslie having sex with others. I dated different women and realized that almost none of them gave me the same chills as Leslie. He continued in a whisper, "You see, Leslie is simply amazing in bed. Her body is pure perfection, and her energy is like a nuclear bomb." Leslie turned red as a tomato. "Okay, so there's no particular incentive for you to sleep with other women?" "No. Yes, this happens from time to time, but such cases are becoming less and less common." "What about jealousy? Have you ever felt jealous watching Leslie, pleasure other men? Sorry for the expression, no offense." "No offense," Leslie said, laughing. "No, I don't feel jealous," Vincent replied. "I think I don't feel jealous because I know that Leslie doesn't meet these men in secret. All this is open, and when they leave at the end of the evening, Leslie and I make love and discuss our experiences, sometimes laughing about it. So you really do it together, and neither of you feels forced to do something they don't like or feel left out. You have learned to see it as a shared experience." "That's right. You got it right. We're going through this together," Leslie confirmed. "If I understand correctly, you treat this as a, hobby, separating it completely from your marriage vows?" I asked carefully. "In our opinion, Rick, love is love, and sex is sex. I never broke my marriage vows because I never cheated on Vincent. What we both decide to do with our bodies has nothing to do with the vows we made," Leslie added. "We think it's normal if, after several years of marriage, someone wants to know what it's like with others." And what were my options? Cheat on Leslie or go on this journey with her? The first option would be a disaster. The second option was full of possibilities, Vincent added. "Well, as I said, I'm all very interested in this. But personally, I don't think I could watch Marcy have sex with another man. I know it's already happened, and I've been having nightmares about it for over a month now. I just can't imagine how I would feel if I saw it with my own eyes," I admitted. "Oh, but your situation is completely different, Rick. What Marcy is doing is completely contrary to our values. She decided to have sex with someone else without discussing it with you first. She gave you a free pass, thinking that it would make up for what she had allowed herself to do, and that you would accept it. But this is no substitute for having an open and honest conversation before something happens," Vincent explained. "However, I don't think she did it because she doesn't love you anymore, Rick. I really think she did it because she needed to explore and discover something new. But the way she did it was very unfortunate," Leslie added. "Exactly. She didn't provide the most important thing, the only thing really necessary, your consent," Vincent insisted. After a long hug with both of them, I said goodbye to my friends and headed home. This was a very unusual conversation. Unusual but amazing. And to my surprise, I had to admit that there was indeed a logic to their madness. My flight to London was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, and I still had a lot to do. I wanted the house to be in perfect condition when Marcy returned. It was more a matter of personal pride than a desire to please her. I removed everything. The only thing I deliberately left as is was a frame with a photo of the two of us, which I threw against the wall, and which had been lying on the floor in pieces for more than a month. It was a powerful symbol and a powerful message. On Monday evening, I made myself a gin and tonic to mark what was probably my last evening in this house. The suitcases were packed, all documents for the trip were ready, everything was settled. It was a very long day. I sat in the chair and couldn't understand why I was still so excited, although everything in my life seemed to have already been decided. I expected to find peace of mind after making all the important decisions, but something was wrong. I went back to the kitchen to get my phone and saw a large envelope with a copy of the divorce papers that I still hadn't gotten around to reading. I sat down and started looking through them. Everything was done as I asked. Marcy probably won't find any reason to argue. That's it. 24 years of life moved into the history category. I must have been sitting thoughtfully at the kitchen table for several minutes when suddenly it dawned on me. Letter, Marcy's letter, where is it? I found it in the bedroom, still in my bag from the trip to Deirdre's. I suddenly realized that I hadn't reread it since that fateful night when Marcy left. I returned to my chair and read the letter a second time, and the third, and suddenly everything became clear. Sometimes a cake is just a cake. Hello, this is Doug Atwater. Hi, Doug. This is Rick Weston. Sorry for the trouble tonight, but it can't wait until tomorrow. It's okay, Rick. I told you to call at any time. How can I help? I want you to stop the divorce. Do not serve my wife with documents this Friday. Rick, this is unexpected. I thought we agreed that this was the only possible solution, he objected. Listen, Doug, I'm leaving for Europe tomorrow and will be back at the end of next week. I increasingly think that this divorce is a hasty step. I don't want to rush things before leaving. Rick, this is just stubborn denial. Don't you think your wife has shown enough disrespect and contempt to even consider the possibility of? Doug, that's enough, I interrupted. You are my lawyer, not a psychiatrist and not my coach. Believe me, I have good reasons to ask you to suspend the case. Will you do it? After an audible sigh, Doug Atwater agreed to pause the process and await my further instructions. I sat down at the table in my home office and began to write a long letter to Times because I wanted to express my thoughts perfectly. It was well after midnight when I decided I was done. On my way to the airport on Tuesday morning, I stopped at the courier service I used for work and sent a letter with detailed instructions to deliver it to Mrs. Marcy Weston at the Ambassador Hotel on Friday by 4 p.m. When she realized that she had been rereading the same line for almost 10 minutes, Marcy Weston realized that she was not in the mood to read. She almost slept the entire flight from Asuncion to Bogota out of fatigue. But the hustle and bustle at Bogota Airport, where she was trying to catch a connecting flight to the United States, threw her off balance, and now she could not sleep a wink. Unlike Penny Washington, who sat next to her and slept like a baby from those very minutes after takeoff. Penny's journey has been quite a roller coaster. She shared Marcy's excitement upon arriving in Bogota and allowed herself to be drawn into the adventure by sleeping with Mark Evans, who was known at the hospital as a big horizontal lover. But after Rick called Marcy that evening, her life became a guilt-ridden place. When she finally worked up the courage to admit cheating on her husband, Josh, over the phone, and saw that he responded calmly, she felt joyfully relieved for days. Josh then admitted to her that he had no reason to be angry with her, since he also had extramarital activities several years ago, but after their wedding. Penny was furious for a week. But then everything calmed down, and now she was looking forward to returning to her husband. But Marcy's thoughts were far from so peaceful. When she signed up for this trip a few months ago, she wanted to prove to herself that there was more to her life than being Rick Weston's loving wife. She needed to do something for herself, by herself, and for herself. And it seemed to her that she could not do this while her husband was constantly watching her. She needed a break from life where her husband, children, parents, or friends would not question her or suffer from her choices or actions. She was happy with what she had done, but the longer the trip went on, the more worried she became about what she had left behind. Throughout the trip, the feeling of guilt for not calling her husband or children grew more and more. She had intended to call Rick at least 24 times, but had held back each time. She told him that she wanted to take a break from them. She had to follow through on her words, even if only to avoid losing her own confidence. She didn't want to give Rick any reason to feel like she couldn't spend a month and a half without him. At the same time, she wanted Rick to realize how much he needed her. Although she had few expectations about this, Rick was probably a little angry after the call. Then Leslie gave him the letter, and he understood everything. Knowing Rick, he probably took advantage of her absence to visit their son on the weekend and watch a couple of baseball games, relax with friends, or do his own thing, oblivious to the fact that she wasn't around. or sleep with Leslie. Leslie. Maybe she made a mistake by letting him have sex with her. How will Rick feel about making love to her after 6 weeks of crazy sex with his young, athletic neighbor? Will he still find her interesting? And most seriously, what will she do if Rick wants to continue having sex with a woman who lives a few meters from their house? She missed her husband terribly. She continued to fantasize about them having dinner together by candlelight. She just hoped that Rick missed her at least a little. All these questions were weighty enough to keep her awake as their plane flew over the Gulf of Mexico. The plane landed on schedule. Soon she cleared customs. She was relieved to see that Rick wasn't standing outside the glass doors, nervously waiting for her while the other passengers gathered at the baggage carousel. Rick, after all, wasn't the type to take orders from anyone without military rank, and oddly enough, she half expected to see him at the airport. After saying goodbye to Penny and the rest of the group, she finally got into her car and headed to the Ambassador Hotel. Rick was nowhere to be seen when she entered the hotel's main lobby. Rick, following instructions to the last letter for the first time in his life. She chuckled. Unless, less than 5 minutes after she entered the room, she was already in the shower. She had been awake for almost 16 hours and needed warm water to wash away the fatigue from her body. She was still wrapped in a towel when she heard a knock on the door. "Rick Weston, you will never change," she muttered with a smirk. A young woman stood on the threshold. "Are you Marcy Weston?" she asked. Marcy's face turned white in the area. "Yes, it's me," answered Marcy, barely able to pronounce. "This letter is for you. Have a good day." Marcy took the letter with a trembling hand. Closing the door, she sat down on the bed. Taking a few deep breaths to calm herself, she opened the letter. "Dear Marcy, as you've probably noticed, I respect your desire to take time off from us and have not attempted to contact you throughout your entire trip. Not that it was easy. These last 6 weeks have probably been the most painful of my life. But the purpose of this letter is not to make you feel bad. I don't write it in an aggressive mood. In fact, I'm grateful that you took the time to write me a letter to explain where you were in your life before you left. Your letter really helped me understand a few things that had gone unnoticed to me all these years. I'll admit, when I first read it, my initial instinct was to fly to Bogota, punch your Dr. Trey in the face, and bring you home at any cost. Luckily, 6 weeks is a long time, long enough to think things through and decide what the best course of action would be. Of course, it would be easier if we could talk at least once a week, but I met you halfway and accepted your rules of the game, and I came to my own conclusions, which may not coincide with yours. Let me first discuss a topic that turns out to have bothered you a lot more than I thought all these years, the question of whether Deirdre and I had sex in Iraq. Was there anything sexual between us? Yes, it was. In a way. Was this intentional? No, absolutely. Marcy, what really happened? After we survived the ambush and were in a state of shock, Deirdre locked me in an empty office and we kissed. I didn't try to stop her. Moreover, I reciprocate her feelings, but we didn't go all the way. It ended with the sirens going off, warning of an attack, and we had to flee from there. Now, why did this happen? You know, when you've just narrowly escaped death, for a while you feel like you're living on borrowed time, and it forces you to do things that you would never have thought of before, because at this moment, what is really important is not the promises made or the obligations that you must fulfill, but the need to seize the moment, live it as if it were tomorrow there won't be a day. That's what really happened in Iraq back then, Marcy. Nothing more, nothing intentional. It wasn't a romance, and we didn't do that anymore. For your information, I went to see Deirdre the weekend after you left. I spent the night with her. Not with her. In the guest room. There was nothing between us. But she helped me understand things that were happening in my life that I simply could not understand on my own. I'm glad I could count on her. I'm not in love with her, but she's a good friend that I'm attached to. The second thing I want to talk about is the 6-month portion of my deployment in Korea when we met in Hawaii. You said I was complacent and ignored your problems at home. You're right, I wasn't in the mood and didn't really want to share my thoughts with you. I should have told you what was going on in my head instead of acting like an idiot. A few days before you arrived, I received a letter from my ex-girlfriend Lydia Steele, who asked if you and I had broken up because she saw your car parked in the Red Roof in parking lot when she came to work every morning. This means that you regularly arrive there an hour before the start of your shift. What were you doing there? I don't know. I later learned that at the time there was construction going on in the hospital parking lot and most of the employees were forced to park elsewhere. Red Roof Inn was a good alternative nearby. But this does not explain the early arrivals. I can't get Lydia's version anymore because she died in a car accident a few months ago. The only version I'll probably ever hear is yours. But that explains my bad mood in Hawaii. For some reason, I thought you were having an affair while I was in Korea. Again, yes, I should have said something. Finally, the last elephant in the room I want to discuss is Leslie. I understand that you wanted me to have sex with her. Well, I'm sorry, but that didn't happen for two reasons. First of all, I'm 48 and she's 30. You know that I've always preferred women my age. Leslie is certainly very attractive, but she is too young for me. Secondly, it would be revenge sex. And I associate sex with pleasure and joy, not with revenge. And I definitely wouldn't use it as a tool for revenge. I had dinner at Leslie and Vincent's last Friday. We had great steaks and a great port and talked a lot. Yes, we talked about exchanging partners, but it was just a discussion. Now let's move on to your trip and some elements of your letter. This will surprise you, Marcy, but if you told me that you felt the need to have sex with someone else, I would probably be open to having a frank conversation with you about it over a bottle of wine. I would share my feelings and fantasies, and maybe we would find something interesting that we could explore together. But you chose a different path. You left without saying goodbye. You didn't write to me that you arrived safely and that everything was fine with you. You left me a letter, which I received 2 days later, in which you essentially said that you wanted to cut me out of your life for 6 weeks so that you could live your life and enjoy your romance. You arranged for me to have sex with my neighbor, Y, to ease your own feelings of guilt, and all those subtle insults scattered throughout the letter about my career and the fact that I wasn't around. It was like I was just playing soldier. It hurt, Marcy, and it still hurts. Marcy, it took your trip and your affair for me to fully understand how angry you were at me during the time I was gone. So I wonder, what brought us to this terrible situation? 3 things come to mind. I think the first is the resentment you feel towards me for being a man with a successful career while you had to raise your family. While I was away, you had to take care of the kids, the house, the bills, etc. And because of this, you had neither the opportunity nor the energy to advance your career. The second factor is a consequence of the first. When I retired, you were finally able to really take charge of your career and are now recognized as the best nurse in the hospital. Life gave you new wings and you were finally able to fly. It was exciting. And you felt like you deserved the freedom to fly wherever you wanted after all these years of being held back. I can't be mad at you for this because I would have felt and acted the same way. Like I said, I would almost certainly be willing to talk to you about it and even give you a high five, but apparently you were too angry with me and chose not to share it. This brings me to the third factor, probably the biggest contributor to the mess we are in right now. Over the years, we have done an appallingly poor job of communicating with each other. Marcy, I have always been incredibly grateful for everything you have done for me and our family. I think my mistake was that I told everyone about it except you. In recent years, I have been especially proud to be married to such a successful professional woman, and I seem to have made the same mistake again. I spoke about you with admiration to others, but not to myself. And if you had told me about your feelings, and I had listened, everything would have turned out completely differently. I'm afraid it's too late now, Marcy. I see the distinct possibility that we have grown so far apart that it can no longer be fixed. That is why I contacted a lawyer and prepared divorce papers. I was going to give them to you at this time today. But in your letter, I found something between the lines that gave me hope. Perhaps there are still coals smoldering under the ashes. So I changed my mind and decided that I wasn't going to let things fall apart without opening the door to a sincere and honest conversation. You probably already guessed that I won't be meeting you in the lobby this afternoon. There are two reasons for this. First of all, I'm a coward too. When you wrote the letter and when I called you at the hotel, you said that Dr. Trey was just a toy for you, that you didn't love him. I believed you. But how are things now, after 6 weeks of living with him as husband and wife? Did you fall in love with him? Perhaps he is now sitting next to you on the bed in the room while you are reading this letter. These 6 weeks of uncertainty have really drained me, Marcy. I feel empty, and the prospect of running into you in the lobby and being told that we're in the past, that you're now with Dr. Trey, is more than I can bear right now. The second reason I won't meet you today is purely logistical. I'm in Paris now. Yes, I still need to travel security issues in international affairs. I flew out last Tuesday, had a 2-day layover in London, and arrived in Paris today. I'll be back next Thursday. My flight schedule is in an envelope. When I return next Thursday, I will be visiting the ambassador. I suggest we meet in the lobby, just like you wanted to do today. If I see you there, I will know 3 things. First of all, you still want to be my wife. Secondly, your affair with Dr. Trey is over. Third, you are ready, like me, to take into account the lessons of the past and make our marriage better. Please do not come if at least one of these elements is missing. Also, please don't try to contact me in the meantime. I want your decision to date or not to be based only on your own thoughts. If I don't see you in the lobby within 2 hours of my arrival, I will know and accept that everything is over between us. I won't be angry, I won't be offended. I'll just cry a little more and then try to move on. Whatever happened, Marcy, I want to apologize for everything I did that may have contributed to this sad situation. I remember the last thing you wrote in your letter and what you said on the phone, that you love me. I love you too, Marcy. Crazy, and I'm holding on to it. With love, Rick. Marcy lay back on the bed. She stared at the ceiling for several minutes before she could come to her senses. Oh my God, I definitely didn't expect this, she said out loud as tears rolled down her cheeks. She always believed that she loved Rick more than he loved her. In her mind, she was just one element in Rick's life. His career was always more important than his wife or family, and she always felt that Rick resented her for making him stop flying. Their life was normal, not ideal, but normal, with all the usual ups and downs that all couples go through. She never thought that Rick would decide to do such soul-searching about her and their marriage. She thought that her trip would be something like a wake-up call for him, nothing more. She half-jokingly said in her letter that Rick might want a divorce. But she never in her life thought that Rick would seriously consider such an option. Unless Rick is joking. But no, that's not like him at all. And most of all, she could not even imagine that Rick would be so destroyed by her actions, and that these 6 weeks would become hell on earth for him. She ordered dinner and a bottle of red wine for her room. Rick wouldn't join her, but she didn't feel ready to return to their empty house just yet. I've always hated flying to and from Europe. Sitting in a flying tin for 11 hours is torture for the nerves and murder for the back. I started to get irritated when we finally landed after a hectic flight. I was pleased that we were finally able to fix the information leak that was discovered in Europe, and I was even more glad that we managed to do this before the situation attracted public attention. Now I was finally allowed to return to the most pressing issue in my life, Marcy. Apart from not meeting her at the hotel last Friday, I managed to do everything almost the way she wanted. I even took disease tests in London last week. I smiled to myself, surprised by the whole situation, as I sat in the clinic in London. I haven't had sex since a month before Marcy left for Colombia, and it was with her. And here I am, looking at the nurse who is losing her patience after not finding a good vein in my arm. As I was driving to the hotel after landing, I suddenly realized that my only regret was that I had not had time to work out a plan B in case Marcy didn't show up. I was full of nerves as I took the elevator from the parking lot to the main lobby. I arrived exactly on time, and I didn't receive any messages from Marcy that she was delayed. I exited the elevator and headed toward the sofas in the center of the lobby. The lobby was empty except for a woman who sat there, nervously looking at the front door. "Hi, Marcy," I said softly, standing behind her. She jumped up in an instant, literally throwing herself into my arms. "Rick, God, I missed you so much," she said and began to sob. We stood there hugging each other for almost a minute. She didn't let me go. I broke the hug and smiled at Marcy. "Rick, I'm so sorry about everything," she said, taking my face in both hands. I kissed her forehead. "Shall we rent a room, Beauty?" I asked with a wink. We received our room key and ordered lunch and wine half an hour later. When we got into the room, I asked Marcy to wait because the first thing I wanted to do was take a quick shower to freshen me up after this endless flight. "I apologize for the pause, but I needed it," I said. "Yes, it was necessary," Marcy replied with a mocking laugh. She was waiting for me with a glass of Pinot Noir and a piece of paper. I looked at her warily. "This is my test for diseases. Purely," she grinned. I laughed and showed her mine. "Marcy, can you confirm that Dr. Trey is no longer participating in this performance?" I asked, uncertainty. It haunted me for 7 weeks. "Trey," Marcy almost laughed. "Rick, I blew Trey Cardoza the same night you called me in Bogota. After we finished talking, we went back to what we were doing. I'll spare the details, and then he started bragging and making insulting comments about you. I really didn't like it. I stopped everything, looked at him for a few seconds, then got up, collected my things, and went to my room. He barely spoke to me for the rest of the trip. The atmosphere was icy, even in the operating rooms. Marcy, I spent 7 weeks afraid that you would fall in love with him and that you and he would come back here as a couple," I admitted. "Rick, this was never possible. You know what? I'm glad you called that night because his reaction to your call made me realize what a jerk he is. And I wasn't the only one who came to this conclusion. He managed to turn the entire group against him in less than 2 weeks." I took Marcy's hands. "Marcy, you have no idea how happy I am to be sitting here with you today," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "Rick, my love, you and I have been living in 2 different worlds, 2 different realities for the last 2 months. It's time for us to connect again." We talked for hours. Nothing was missed. She has come to terms with what happened between me and Deirdre Keel in Iraq. She admitted that she felt terrible because she planned the affair in response to something that turned out to be completely minor, as she said. She explained why she had come to the Red Roof in parking lot before while I was in Korea. Her colleague and friend, Carlota Jimenez, was hiding her sister Juanita, who entered the United States illegally. She couldn't keep her in her house because her husband was a terrible person. So Carlota got her a job at the Red Roof Inn with the help of the hotel manager, Lydia, who was her friend. Carlota asked Marcy to visit her sister in the morning while she worked the night shift, and she visited her sister in the evening. What's funny is that Marcy didn't know that Lydia was the manager of this hotel, and it turns out that Lydia never got involved with Juanita, Carlota, and Marcy. We talked a lot about the problems in our relationship, about our mistakes as a couple that led to a series of misunderstandings that almost led to divorce. For the first time in many years, we were able to discuss everything calmly and constructively. I felt that Marcy was completely honest, and I didn't hide anything either. That night our sex was like a second, first time. It was probably the most intimate moment Marcy and I had ever experienced. "I have a gift for you before we go to bed," Marcy said with a mysterious smile. She handed me a gift bag. Inside was a photo of Marcy and me that she had picked up from the living room floor. She put it in a new frame. "Thank you, Marcy," I replied softly with a smile. "Look at the back," she said. "It says, 'Made in China,'" I replied. "No, not on this label, smart guy." There was a small tag that said, "Unbreakable." My love for her was intact. My faith in her has returned. As Winston Churchill once said, "Never waste a good crisis." Marcy and I were able to learn lessons from this dark period in our lives. We learn to talk to each other, to express our fears, doubts, gratitude, appreciation, and yes, our fantasies. I'm happier than ever. And judging by the bright smile I see first thing every morning, I can tell Marcy is happier than ever too. Our children never found out that their parents almost got divorced. And that's good. Penny and Josh Washington were also able to mend their relationship. They have become our closest friends since then. Dr. Trey Cardoza was not promoted to surgical team leader due to behavioral issues. He left the hospital 2 months after the Doctors Without Borders mission. No one particularly regretted his departure. Deirdre started dating someone a few weeks after Marcy returned from South America. She was initially very skeptical when she learned that Marcy and I were able to make our relationship work again, but over time she cooled down about it. She comes to us for the weekend with her fiancé, and what's surprising, Marcy not only agrees to her arrival, she invited her in the first place. Leslie and Vincent Nielsen moved to the Midwest after Vincent was transferred to a new job. We periodically correspond and call each other. Jenny Harshly and Chuck Marston are now a couple. Looks like the little stunt I pulled for them that day at the Goldsteins was a good move. Marcy called Leslie in Chicago to tell her about it. They must have laughed for 10 minutes on the phone. Doug Atwater nearly freaked out when I told him to throw away the divorce papers. He called me a weakling, an idiot, and a few other endearing words. I threatened to file a complaint with the Bar Association. That was the end of it. Marcy was promoted to head nurse for the entire hospital. She works on a more convenient schedule and for a much higher salary. She just glows with happiness. For me, I still get assigned the most difficult tasks at work. But I was able to return to my first love, and with Marcy's blessing, I bought myself a Cessna 162. I bought it. On the fly. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.